Thanks, David. Want to welcome everyone. So as David said, today we're going to be talking about the City of Columbia's proposed pedestrian safety ordinance. And several people have been willing to speak today about issues or concerns that they have, pros and cons about the ordinance. So we have Dan Viets should be here soon, a local civil rights attorney. I think we all know him from his work with Normal. He used to be chair of the local ACLU. Dan will be talking today. Vera Elwood is here today. Of course, our second ward city council person who was elected last summer. And this ordinance actually originated with her predecessor, Lisa Meyer, in the second ward. So we're looking forward to that. Then Catherine Armbrust, the director of Como Mobile Aid Collective, is here. She actually helped form the collective years ago, and we actually heard from her recently, I believe. And lastly, but not least, Josh Parshall with Local Motion will be speaking to us today. He's the Chief Development Officer there. And I actually want to hear a little bit what locomotion is. What I was going to suggest is, since there's four of you, is that you each take about 5 minutes or so and talk about the issue of the ordinance. You can also talk a little bit about your organization. But I was suggesting we start with Vera because this is a city council issue, and she could probably take 2 or 3 additional minutes and say what the ordinance is. So thanks for being here. And we do have somebody from the press here today, right?
Yes.
Sarah, yeah, there you are.
Yep, I'm Sarah with KRCG 13, just sitting in to hear a little bit more about the ordinance and people's thoughts.
Okay.
Let me invite you, Sarah, to put questions in chat or ask questions like anyone else. I also want to recognize our elected officials. I see Roger Johnson, county prosecutor, and of course, one of our guests, Vera, is an elected official, city council. Who else? Does that cover our elected officials? Okay, go on, Alice.
Okay, so Vera, if you want to start and tell us a little about the ordinance, and then if you want to go into where you're at on the ordinance, if you and thanks for being here today.
Of course. I am happy to start us off. My name is Vera Elwood. I am the Ward 2 City Council member representing Ward 2, which is one of our biggest wards, if not the biggest in Columbia in terms of geographic expanse. We cover a ton of area. We are north of I-70, then we dip down just a little bit to scoop up the mall, to scoop up those neighborhoods behind the Walmart on Broadway, but mostly we are north of I-70. I am also the newest member onto City Council. I was just recently sworn into City Council in August following the special election over the summer, which also means that I am the most recent City Council candidate to be knocking on doors every single day, to be talking to constituents every single day during a campaign season. 2 of my colleagues are about to start that journey for the fresh campaign season that will start soon. But I am most recently off of that journey. The other really interesting thing about my piece in this pedestrian safety ordinance is exactly what Alice was speaking about. This ordinance, or the request for this ordinance, really originated with my predecessor in Ward 2, former council member Lisa Meyer. She was seeing some complaints about people standing in the medians and started requesting information about how to address this. It started with a large pedestrian safety study that was completed by an outside consultant, and we received the version of that study. For those of you who have been following along, we've been doing most of this work off of a draft study, and as of the meeting agenda that was posted yesterday morning, we do now have a final version of that study. I have not yet had the time to lay the two side by side and figure out exactly what changes have been made in that final version, but we do have the final version of that study. That study went into a lot of improvements that can be made to enhance pedestrian safety, specifically looking at our medians and some of our busiest and most dangerous roads for pedestrians. The vast majority of this study focused on real infrastructure improvements and projects that we can make moving forward. It talks about improved medians. It talks about increasing the number of sidewalks. It talks about increasing the length that a stoplight is to allow a pedestrian to actually cross a significantly longer road so that they do not get stranded at the median in the first place. It talks about protected bike lanes. It has all of these incredible infrastructure projects included in it for ways that we can physically keep our pedestrians safe. Right now, the only movement that we have seen come from this study is this ordinance. Now, ordinances were mentioned in the study. It was a part of the recommendations. It was simply a piece of the recommendations that were offered alongside all of those physical infrastructure improvements. Looking at the ordinance myself, coming in, knowing that this did originate in Ward 2, this originated with my constituents, knowing that I have recently been door to door talking to my constituents about their #1 concerns in Columbia, knowing that when I campaigned, one of my main issues was around pedestrian safety and improved road infrastructure that would allow people to get to work without having to use their personal vehicles. What I have heard in terms of concerns from Ward 2 has been a desire for increased public transit, a desire for protected bike lanes, a desire for crosswalks where their kids have to get to the school bus in the morning, a desire for better stoplight systems and roundabouts at dangerous intersections, and those infrastructures that can be immediately put in place. What I never heard from my neighbors and my constituents in my ward was a concern about someone standing on a median being a danger to the person in the car. What I never heard was a desire to address pedestrian safety in this way. I think it is very telling that when we talk about this ordinance, we have heard a lot of people use the terms panhandling ordinance and loitering ordinance. That is not what this is, partially because there are a lot of legalities around creating a panhandling ordinance or a loitering ordinance. Most versions of those are not legal as they infringe on First Amendment rights. What we need to make sure we are doing is that if we are creating something titled a pedestrian safety ordinance, it needs to actually be addressing pedestrian safety. If we are trying to address panhandling, if we are trying to address loitering or urban camping, we can't pretend that is a pedestrian safety issue and give it a different name, but write a similar ordinance. We need to make sure that if we are calling it pedestrian safety, it is actually relating to pedestrian safety. And I don't want to talk forever. I know there will be more questions, but the last point I want to make, and one I have been making regularly, is that with this ordinance, it has to do with the amount of time that someone stands on the median. What happens is if someone is standing on that median for more than 2 cycles of a traffic light, they are in violation of an ordinance. Anyone who has tried to cross Stadium, who has tried to cross Business Loop, who has tried to cross some of our wider roads, knows that you often need more than 2 traffic lights. I have been told that as long as someone has the intention of continuing to cross the road, the ordinance will not apply to them. That then means the ordinance does not apply to pedestrians. If they intend to cross the road, they are a pedestrian. And so why are we calling this a pedestrian safety ordinance if it is not affecting those attempting to traverse across the road? I'm very excited to hear from our other guests about how this is going to affect the people that they serve.
We'll do general questions at the end, but is there some specific thing that someone would like to raise with Vera right now? Seeing none, let's go on. Who's next? I forgot. Alice, who's next? Alice, unmute yourself.
Dan, would you like to take a stab at it from more of a civil liberties issue? I know I'm a protester, and that's a big concern of mine.
Dan, you'll have to unmute yourself.
All right, now,
Thank you.
yes, thank you. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue. I think it is an important issue from a civil liberties and constitutional rights point of view. It does seem to be a very thinly disguised attempt to restrict panhandling. And there are some people I know who are uncomfortable seeing poor people asking for money in public places. And I really think that's at least a large part of the motivation here. It's cloaked in language all about pedestrian safety, but I don't see, now I haven't read every word of the report that was issued by the consultant, but I don't see any research demonstrating that this type of ordinance reduces pedestrian injuries or death. I think there's just an unspoken assumption that it would do so. My understanding, and again, I can't cite a source at this moment, is that the majority of pedestrian accidents in Columbia occur on or near the University of Missouri campus. And the ordinance is certainly not narrowly drawn to address those concerns. I'm certainly not an expert legally on this issue, but the little research I've done indicates that the controlling case, the major case on the topic of panhandling ordinances, is Reed versus Gilbert from 2015. 10 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in that case that ordinances designed to restrict or prohibit panhandling, that is to say begging in public, are unconstitutional, that they do violate the First Amendment. So the city staff has engaged in a great deal of subterfuge, I think, to dress this ordinance as anything but an ordinance to prohibit or restrict panhandling. But it's very clear, I think, that that's the motivation here. There are at least two areas of First Amendment concern. And I've mentioned that panhandling is a protected First Amendment activity. We've had poor people with us since the beginning of time. The Bible says we'll always have the poor with us. I see no reason to doubt that. They make some people uncomfortable. It makes some people uncomfortable that we have people in our community who are so poor that they're reduced to begging in public places. But I think that the intent of this ordinance to restrict panhandling, I mean, who else hangs out on medians? Who hangs out on medians? That's the question I think reveals the intent of this ordinance. I don't see very many people hanging out on the medians other than those who are begging. And they have a protected First Amendment right to do that, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how unsightly that may be. Now, if they're breaking other laws, littering laws, for instance, then I urge the police to enforce those existing ordinances. Frankly, I am more aggravated by littering the older I get. It must be a function of aging, I think. But it pisses me off, no matter who's doing it, to see people throw trash on our streets and highways. I mean, it's like a slap in the face to everybody else in society. I'm too damn lazy to put this trash where it ought to be, and I don't care that the rest of the world has to tolerate seeing my trash on the streets and the sidewalks. They should enforce those ordinances. But this ordinance is an attempt to get around what the U.S. Supreme Court has told us is a prohibition on prohibiting begging. And the other major area of First Amendment concern, which Alice referred to, is the fact that many people do use public venues, including mediums in some cases, as a venue for protest, for political protest. Political protest is the most highly protected category of speech in our nation under our Constitution. There is no more highly protected category, not commercial speech, not artistic speech, but political speech is the single most highly protected category of expressive activity. The Supreme Court told us in the Reed v. Gilbert case that ordinances which attempt to restrict panhandling are subject to strict scrutiny, which means that they have to be narrowly tailored to accomplish their stated purpose. I don't think this ordinance would withstand a challenge of that nature. I think it's absolutely clear when taken in context, not when viewed by just reading the city staff report, but when looking at the larger context of the public debate and discussion around crime and around homelessness in our community, it becomes very clear that that is the motivation and the purpose of this ordinance is to restrict protected speech, protected First Amendment activity. And I work with a group called the Mid-Missouri Civil Liberties Association. I'm not really a civil rights lawyer, despite the billing that I got on the notice here today. I am primarily a criminal defense lawyer, and we deal with constitutional enforcement day in and day out in the criminal defense area. I also have an abiding interest in civil liberties. There's a distinction, although it's perhaps somewhat subtle, but there is a distinction between civil liberties and civil rights. The Mid-Missouri Civil Liberties Association is an organization of people who highly value civil liberties, who are concerned about their preservation, and which is an outgrowth, really a successor organization to the Mid-Missouri ACLU. We had an ACLU chapter here for some 38 years, I think it was. And then the ACLU, not only here in Missouri, but across the country, did away with local chapters. We felt strongly enough to form our own independent organization, which has very similar purposes and engages in very similar activities and works with the ACLU when the opportunity arises. And we are very concerned. We have formally, our board of directors last Saturday formally took a position opposing the passage of this ordinance. And I have sent a letter to each of the council members and the mayor expressing that opposition. Perhaps I should take a break and let others speak now.
Thank you, Dan, for, as always, a very concise and clear elaboration of the legal issues here. I actually want to have a question to you right now, if I can use my prerogative here. I understand the freedom to panhandle and certainly the freedom of political speech. Now, on the matter of safety, when I see people standing, I'm driving past somebody standing in the median, I'm afraid for their safety. And I see that it's a hot day and they look like they're about to fall over, or maybe they have an animal with them. And I'm really afraid something bad's going to happen, not only to them, but maybe some of the drivers. Is there anything that you were talking about there that can address my concerns for the safety of that person and maybe their animal?
If the animal is being abused or neglected, certainly there are laws that govern that and that arguably would be violated again if the animal is actually being subjected to abuse or neglect. As far as the safety of individuals, I have a libertarian streak. I do think that the government should limit itself in its attempts to protect us from ourselves. I do not believe it's the role of the government to tell me that I should cross the street only at one location and that I can only do it at a certain time and place. I think people do have a right to take certain risks, and among them is the right to stand in a median and ask their fellow citizens for some money. And again, it's just transparently clear that's what this ordinance is about. One of the provisions
I
of
think
it
you're right.
specifically prohibits distribution conduct defined as an exchange which requires an acceptance or rejection of the item being distributed between a person located on a major corridor roadway. Well, I mean, the words panhandling, the words begging, the words homeless never appear in these reports. But that's
And that could be a political pamphlet as well, couldn't it?
yes, absolutely it could. So I think that the true purpose of the ordinance is pretty obvious when you consider, again, the context in which it arose, the context of public discussion about crime and about homelessness in our community. One of the ironies, I think, is that if this ordinance passes and if this ordinance succeeds, it will most likely drive the people who are begging downtown. They won't violate this ordinance downtown on Broadway. And I don't think that's what anyone really wants.
I would
Okay,
also,
go ahead, Vera.
if it's okay, I'd love to also answer that question or speak to that question, which is the concern for safety, which I think is very real and very valid. I have spent most of my career working with teenagers, and I've spent a lot of that career working with teenagers in the Midwest, where we get a whole lot of snow. And we could have 5 feet of snow, and those teenagers are still going to leave the house in shorts and a tank top every single day and stand in the snow and make snow angels. And I will be terrified for their personal health and safety in those moments. I don't believe we should pass a law forcing them to wear jackets if it gets below freezing. I don't believe that is our place. I will work to connect them with every service in the community that can offer them free coats if they don't have one available in their home. I will talk to them and explain, I know you are a teenager right now and you do not feel the cold. Here is the long-term effect it's going to have on you. Here are the reasons you should wear a jacket. I can connect them to services. I can offer them education. I can do everything in my power to help increase their safety. I'm not going to pass a law saying they have to wear a jacket when it's below freezing, just because I am concerned about them. And I think that is relevant here as well.
Okay, let's see, Josh or Max, who's the next person? Or does Alice want to help me here?
Catherine, who would like to go next?
Am I being
And can
pointed
you-
at?
Yeah, well, sure,
Okay.
if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, Local Motion, for anybody who's not familiar, is Columbia's transportation equity advocacy organization. What that means is that we push for better sidewalks and more of them. We push for better facilities for bicycles, whether that's multi-use paths or someday in the future, protected bike lanes. And we're also active in trying to improve Columbia's public transit system. We have a bus system that simply does not serve the needs of most folks. So that's what we do. We do it in a variety of ways. We have outreach events like Bike Walk and Wheel Week and Week Without Driving. We run grassroots training. We have cohorts of people who are affected by these issues, by the burdens they face getting around or in community with people who face those burdens, and help us do our work. And we, in turn, give them some training as well as some education on transportation issues. And then we do advocacy. We ran Columbia's first Complete Streets campaign to get Columbia to adopt a Complete Streets policy in 2004. We led the campaign to get Columbia to adopt Vision Zero in 2016. Vision Zero is sort of a policy and a set of programs aimed to reduce and eliminate injuries and death from traffic violence, from crashes. And there's an upcoming update to that Complete Streets policy that'll be in summer 2026. And that update is happening because of the initiative of Local Motion, the Livable Streets campaign that ended in 2023. For those who've been around a while, you might know us as PedNet. That was the founding name of our organization in 2000. We've been around for about 25 years. So We've been around a while. We've been naming priorities and asking for changes for 25 years. Um, our perspective is one that is like we want to see more people getting around outside their cars is one part, and then the other big part is we need everyone to be able to get where they want to go, whether they are physically able to drive, whether they're too young to drive, too old to drive, can't afford to drive. Everyone should be able to get where they want to go, right? So those are the two things, right? Mode shift and then transportation security that really guide us. Um, we've got a specific perspective on this because we care a lot about the safety of people who walk, the people who bike, the people who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices to get around. And when something is called a pedestrian safety ordinance, we expect it to address pedestrian safety in a meaningful way. And this looks to us more like trying to manage the behavior of people who are outside of cars. We also, as we dug into the study as well as the ordinance, the study didn't have a lot of examples, or as far as I know, any examples of serious crashes that were the result of someone standing in a median, or that resulted in serious injury or death of someone standing in the median. I do think it's correct. A lot of what we see in terms of crashes that involve pedestrians, a lot of what we're talking about is downtown. Um, and many of those are low speed. That's one thing that Vision Zero does ask folks to differentiate between like low speed crashes and serious injuries and deaths. Um, but all that's to say that this to us does look like something that's about something else, and that's really concerning, um, because there's so much improvement. Like there's so much room for Columbia to improve on these pedestrian safety things, right? We know what actually like effectively keeps pedestrians safe. What is gonna protect people who are walking or otherwise traveling outside a car are reducing speeds, providing adequate infrastructure, right? How many times have you seen somebody in a mobility device going down West Ash because the sidewalk is not adequate for them, and so they have to make the choice to go into a bike lane or even into a lane of car traffic, right? So it's infrastructure, it's reducing speed, it's reducing the height of these vehicles, especially hood height, is a major risk. And look, frankly, like so many things, a lot of Columbia's problems are downstream of federal and state policy. There are things that municipalities in some cases can do to encourage people to drive smaller vehicles, or at least not accommodate people who are driving these really large, dangerous vehicles. Um, but part of the trend we see in the United States with increased deaths of people who are walking has to do with the fact that you've got a bunch of vehicles out there that, look, I'm not a tall guy, but there's a lot of cars out there, a lot of trucks out there with hoods that are at my eye level, right? And if I get hit by one of those, I'm not going onto the hood, I'm going under the car. Yeah. Um, so all those things, right? Those are things that make people safer. This feels like, again, managing behavior at a particular moment under a particular set of political pressures. Um, with that in mind, local motion wants city council focused on things like this upcoming complete streets revision. We want the city focused on the work that is happening around Business Loop, right? Which just had these road safety audits, which is going to be getting some updated design proposals through the Reconnecting Communities grant. That's a DOT grant that potentially could lead to some exciting changes. Um, the city has this pedestrian level of comfort map, which is going to be used for internal purposes by the planning department. That's supposed to sort of show where bottlenecks are, like if you're trying to get from point A to point B, and you're walking both along roadways and at specific intersections. And that's a tool that the city is going to be able to use to maybe set some priorities. But all this stuff, all these are the things that we'd like to see happen. And it's a little frustrating to see pedestrian safety get used for this other purpose. So I think that's enough from local motion right now, but I'm happy to answer more questions.
I want to welcome you, particularly Josh. I think it may be your first time at Muleskinners. I do remember HeadNet back in the past, and thank you for reminding us of the complications of the safety problem. Any particular question for Josh while we go on, I guess, to our fourth guest?
Ready for me?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody.
We've
Thank you
seen you recently.
I know. Thank you for having me back. I'm Catherine
Welcome back.
Armbrust. Thank you. From Como Mobile Aid Collective. I want to thank Vera and Josh and Dan for all of their good works. Like that was all really important information because I think that this issue has a lot of technical, but also emotional layers to it. And it's really important that we recognize those layers. If you don't know what Como Mobile Aid Collective does, join me in learning. We do homelessness outreach for folks. We started as a mobile soup kitchen. We now continue to have a mobile soup kitchen, a free clinic, and we do seasonal street outreach. So part of the reason I'm here today is to give voice to the folks that we work with and who are unhoused and who, you know, are a typically and historically marginalized population, given little voice in communities or governments because of stigmas that are imposed upon them. And I think that this is what we've been saying this whole time. I believe that Dan spoke about that like, this is mostly about people being uncomfortable with visible poverty. Seeing suffering in our streets is incredibly traumatic for the folks who are experiencing it and for those of us who are viewing it. A lot of people want to sweep poverty and homelessness sort of behind closed doors, right? Let's concentrate them into a building in Utah somewhere, right? Let's concentrate them somewhere else where we don't have to deal with or see them. But what's really happening is that there's a lot of loud people who don't want to see this stuff, but also don't want people to have resources. So it becomes this incredibly complex and confusing moment of like, how do we help people with no resources, but how do we keep punishing them for not having resources? And this is really about like being punitive. It's about making people comfortable and creating more punitive ways to like focus on folks who are without resources, who are visibly poor and do not have a place to go inside and experience their poverty. They're just in public all the time. So we have been very concerned about this because it's not even thinly veiled, right? It's definitely targeted at when Lisa Meyer was in office, we had a conversation about this. And it's the loud voices, right? The squeaky, what is it? The squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So like we have a lot of loud people who are uncomfortable with a lot of things in this village that we live in. And I think a lot of people who have maybe a clear understanding of the complexities probably need to be a little bit louder themselves. So we've been putting out a call to action for folks on our social media to really encourage people to share with City Council how they're feeling about it, because we all want people to be safe. Like that's like not the issue, right? We want pedestrians to be safe. We want bicyclists to be safe. We want motorists to be safe. But what's happening is we're seeing a lot of visibility, incredibly negative visibility passed around on social media by very specific groups who encourage people to document people who are suffering and then portray it in a very negative light. And if someone is passing out on the median, please send an ambulance for them. Of course, we want to cover that. Like we want them to be safe. But if someone's just sitting there asking for money, that I don't see the issue in that, right? When there's a lack of resources, reaching out to one's community is a resource in the same way that nonprofits do, right? Our friends on the street don't have a website. They don't have the access and reach that we do. So like, that's where they're going. They're going to their community to ask for help. Woo. So that's like where we are on this issue, right? And we can get into all of these like issues of unconstitutionality, because like we've been talking to the along with Kenzie and some folks from Locomotion have been talking to folks from the National Homeless Law Center. We've been talking to folks from the Missouri ACLU. So there are issues with First Amendment rights, and there are issues with trying to install these ordinances and then the ordinances being taken to circuit courts and being ruled as unconstitutional. And from what I understand, that happened in Oklahoma City and in Albuquerque. Ordinance is very similar to this. So that then costs the taxpayers money to like move through that. The other thing, I'm gonna go for a little while longer on my soapbox, but the other thing that we have put out in our call to action, and I want to point out, actually, I meant to say this earlier. I literally got an email this morning. There was no text in the body of the email. The only text was in the subject line, and it said, "Tired of panhandlers." And panhandlers was all in capitals with 1, 2, 3, 4 exclamation points. Nothing else. That person is tired of panhandlers and directly connects this ordinance to that idea of panhandling. So some of the questions we have been asking are similar to, if you're not aware, trespass charges have increased. Chief Schluty reported that there has been a, quote, 37% increase in crimes against society. And most of those include people being harassed and then giving trespassing tickets downtown. And so I've talked about this before. What happens when people get trespassed? They either don't have a way to keep up with the ticket. They don't have a way to keep up with the date or time that they need to be somewhere. They might miss their court date and get a failure to appear, which then issues a warrant for their arrest, which then usually issues them to go into the city jail, which then sometimes sends them to the county jail, which continues to clog up our court systems and our jails, which are incredibly overcrowded. Ask the Boone County Bail Fund about that. There's like 100 more people in the Boone County Jail right now than, well, probably way more than that than there should be, but in terms of capacity. So some of our questions have been related to this idea of trespassing, right? Like, how does the city intend to enforce this code? Will this result in just asking someone who is on a median to move along, or are they going to receive a ticket? How will this impact citizen protesters? Because I think that that's a really important part that I actually did not think about until a young fella mentioned that to me the other night. And it was like, something went off in my brain that I was like, oh, that's a really important part of this too. How will this affect our police officers' ability to respond to more serious crimes or accidents? How does this make our city safer? Is this the best use of law enforcement resources? And how will this affect our court dockets that are already overburdened with trespassing charges and other minor infractions? So, and that's just like some of many questions that I don't think council has the answer to yet, especially about like what this will look like in a like punitive way. How are people going to be punished if they violate this ordinance? And I think that's a really important thing to consider, especially for people who are literally not allowed to be, they're not allowed to exist anywhere. So it's just creating more parameters on existence. And yes, Dave is throwing some stuff in the chat. All right, I will like bring it back in. Josh, is your hand up?
I actually do have answers to some of those questions.
Oh, great. Thank you, Vera.
Answers this morning. We received answers at City Council because we have been asking the same questions. And the plan right now is that it would be a phased approach. So it would start with 60 days of education, then 60 days of warnings, then 60 days of putting the actual punitive measures in place. The intention is for tickets and citations to be written, which would then go to the municipal court, knowing that many of those will end up on the community support docket. So I think that that last question that you had, which was how will this tax our already overtaxed court system, the community support docket is massively long. It's an incredible program. It is one of the best programs we have in Columbia. It is comprehensively too big for the amount of time that it is given in the week. And so that is a main concern. We were also told this morning that, as always, the police will continue to prioritize calls based on need, which means that if something urgent and life-threatening is happening, the call about someone standing in a median is not going to rise to the top, which then may lead to the people who are excited about this ordinance, who are wanting to not see panhandlers on the medians. They're going to place these calls, and then it's going to go to the bottom of the line, and nothing's going to end up happening, and they'll be just as frustrated as they were before the ordinance went into place, but now perhaps angrier because there is a law in place and we don't have the capacity to enforce it. Because we are constantly hearing about how many calls our police are in charge of responding to and how difficult it is to manage all of that. And so adding more for something that does not have a clear safety risk right now is very concerning to me. But yeah, we got some of those answers this morning.
Thank you.
Okay, Josh, please
I
go on.
would add something that I've thought about a little bit is that on top of all these enforcement questions, to me, this sends a message. To certain members of our community that harassment of unhoused people will be okay. So, you know, if you make that call, you don't see the person get moved along by police, are you then going to go and try to enforce it yourself? To me, it sort of adds to this overall impression that that based on someone's economic status or housing status, it's fair game to treat them however you want. And I mean, I don't know if other folks perceive that as being a risk, but to me, it sends exactly the wrong message right now.
Well, you're perceiving this as someone who's spent a lot of time on the streets more than I have, that this sort of thing can happen like that.
I do think because there's already a huge issue with harassment of our unhoused population from both the police and from the public, specifically encouraged by certain entities in town, certain anonymous entities in town, that there's already a lot of danger and vulnerability. I will mention again that we have had people pepper sprayed, tased, they have things thrown at them all the time. So like, and some of those things happen while they're on a median. So the danger to them is not from the car, it's from the human inside of the car. It's from the human either exploiting them and exploiting their suffering, or it's assaulting them from either being like spit on, pepper sprayed, having things thrown at them. So like, that's a really different part of like the idea of safety. And I think Josh is right that passing things like this does make it feel like it's government sanctioned harassment, like it makes government sanctioned harassment like okay. And I think that a lot of people already feel incredibly entitled to that, especially considering the national conversation of what's happening with other historically marginalized populations and the sort of like brown shirt attitudes that are going around our nation, that this is just like another step towards like saying that's okay. Like, it's okay. These people don't deserve to exist in this space. Like, keep pushing them away. I'm real fired up about this, y'all, if you can't tell.
I think it is also important to note that this is not going to be a one and done issue. We are not just looking at the pedestrian safety ordinance. Soon we will have an urban camping ordinance coming to us. Soon we are going to have more things coming to us from this discussion about violence downtown, where people are wanting to see heavy enforcement on the unhoused population, and not necessarily enforcement on things, on the people that are committing the violent acts downtown, because we are not seeing a correlation between the violence and the unhoused population. And so this is not something where we can think, if on Monday night this gets voted down, we cannot think, okay, big pat on the back, we're done, we've protected our community. We have to continue to work to protect our community, because things will continue to come down this pipeline.
Okay, very wonderful panel. I thought this was just about panhandling. It's really a big issue is opened up here. Very interesting and very complicated. There must be some questions out there from somebody who has a thought or an issue or an angle on this that they'd like to see addressed. Anyone?
There's lots
We
of
have
hands
about
up.
10. We have about, are there hands up? I'm not
Yes,
seeing
there
them.
are hands up. Max Quinn was first.
Ah, Max Quinn, thank you.
Hi, thank you guys so much. I'm a reporter from the Missourian, and
Welcome.
I just have a question for Miss Elwood. Do you have any indication of how you will vote that night? And then do you have any indication for how your fellow council members might vote?
So, great question. There are gonna be two things happening on Monday night, and I appreciate this because I wanted to mention this. On Monday night, me and Councilmember Sample, as well as Councilmember Carroll, have all put forward at the last meeting that we would like to see this vote tabled until we can get feedback from our boards and commissions. We have boards and commissions that we have appointed to be experts in certain fields relating to this ordinance, and this ordinance was never brought before them for their input. The Bike and Pedestrian Committee did not get to speak on the pedestrian safety ordinance. So we want to make sure that we are valuing the input of our commissions and receiving the expert advice that we have asked them to give to us. So we'll be asking to table until all of those boards and commissions can get back to us. I am not certain how that vote is going to go. I am not certain how the vote for the ordinance overall will go. I know that I will be voting to table, and I very much intend to vote against this ordinance, as I do not see it improving the safety of pedestrians in our community. I do not hear from our pedestrian advocates and safety experts that it's going to increase their safety. And I do hear from experts and from people who are at risk telling me that this is going to make them less safe. And so when it comes to a vote, whether it is at this meeting or a future meeting, I currently intend to vote against it.
Okay,
Herb,
thank
your
you so
hand-
much.
Herb, your hand went down. Do you still have a question?
I wish to defer to others. I'll
Okay.
ask questions if there's an open space.
Okay. Peter Schneeberger.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity, David. It seems like this is all in response to the tragic shooting of Miss Williams in Columbia downtown. And obviously no panhandler took any response. They were not responsible for this. So it looks like, blaming the victim here, these people are marginalized communities. They are not the problem. When Miss Williams got shot, they were not involved. And so why are we taking action on them when, maybe there is some action required? We can't let young people, even late at night, be unsafe downtown. But this doesn't look to be addressing that problem to me. Do you think there are other things we could do to address safety downtown at night? That's
I'm
to our city council person.
Yeah, I was gonna say I am sure that Kat also has some thoughts on this, and I would love to hear her thoughts as well. I will say this specific ordinance has been in the works, I think, for over a year now. So while this is not an immediate response to the tragic death of Ayanna Williams downtown, the conversation around it, the community response to this ordinance being brought up now is absolutely fed into and fed by the outpouring of concerns, feelings, support, and all of the different emotions that surrounded that tragedy. So I was not on council when this was first being discussed, but I have been told the conversation from those first few meetings versus the conversation now, it is like being in a whole different world, largely because of what is happening with the conversation around downtown. Personally, when I think about keeping downtown safe, because I do want people to be safe downtown, I want everyone to feel safe in our community. I defer to what we continue to hear from our police chief, which is that the biggest issue is guns getting into the hands of people who did not buy them. Right now in the state of Missouri, there is not a law against possession of guns by a juvenile. They cannot buy the gun, but they sure can hold it, carry it, have it. And without laws preventing that, we've had other deaths this year that have been perpetrated at the hands of a child. We have kids killing kids and no law preventing that kid from holding a gun in the first place. We also don't currently have an ordinance that requires gun owners to inform the police when their gun has been stolen. So then there can be guns out in the community that we aren't aware are out there. And so our police are asking us to enforce a law that would, or an ordinance that would require gun owners to report any weapons missing within a certain number of days of them realizing it's missing. Things like that will actively keep our community safer. Other things that keep our community safer are actually supporting our unhoused population instead of blaming them for violence they didn't perpetrate. But I also really want to hear, I know it was directed at me, I really want to hear from Kat on this question because I'm sure she's fired up about it too.
The conflation of these two topics has been incredibly problematic. We've talked about that a bunch. We've talked to the instigator of that conflation, who seems to hold a lot of power here in town. What has popped up recently that I was unaware of, many people I think were unaware of, that during the conflation of gun violence and homelessness, specifically downtown, which doesn't have really anything to do with this ordinance, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but it was made very clear publicly by some news articles that MU is interested in developing more of downtown, and that area is currently underused by most of the community, but often used by folks who are experiencing homelessness. So the desire to clean up downtown in a lot of different ways is again about like money, encouraging more development, and discouraging things that make people feel unsafe or uncomfortable. There's a very big difference between someone feeling unsafe and really being in an unsafe situation. And I don't want to diminish anyone who does feel unsafe around a strange person that they don't know, especially people who identify as female or trans or queer. There is a lot of violence perpetrated against those types of populations, but the public and very like global stereotype of someone who is poor somehow being more dangerous than someone who is not poor is incredibly problematic, and something that like we as a full society have to push back against. So when people with money want to get more money, they tend to not like people who don't have money. That's a big part of it. Thank you.
Very, very strong point there, Kate. Next question to KRCG's Sarah Cummings.
Hi, I'm Sarah with KRCG 13. I have a question for Josh. I know that you mentioned that there are many other ways to protect pedestrians and many other actions that local motion would like to see taken regarding pedestrian safety. There's kind of an argument out there that does say, yes, there are better things to do, but doing something is better than doing nothing, and getting people away from cars and roadways at least does something. I was wondering what your response would be to that side of things.
Yeah, partly, look, no, I don't think anybody in our office is going to tell you that standing on a median at Stadium and Broadway is safe, let alone or enjoyable. You know, it's more that we have real questions we have real questions about enforcement. We have real questions about the motivations. And we're really focused on system changes that make streets that work for everyone. What we've seen in the last 100 years in this question, and I would refer anybody here to the War on Cars podcast. They just did an episode about this, right? 100 years ago, streets were for people. You could walk across the street. There might be horses in the street. You could ride your bike in the street, and cars were in the street. Cars started killing people. People driving cars started killing people. And as communities started reacting to that, the inherent danger of these large, heavy, fast-moving vehicles, there was a concerted effort by car manufacturers and others to change what a street is, to say that streets are for cars, to say that we need to build streets that serve the purposes primarily of moving cars quickly, regardless of how many people are in them. And that like push is responsible for the built environment all around us, as well as the car culture that we all live with every day. And I'll say that on top of all the practicalities, to me, this is just another way of doubling down on this idea that moving cars quickly is the be all and end all of our road design. That public space is for moving people from point A to point B in a car, rather than for people to exist, whatever they're doing, whether they're protesting, whether they're hanging out, whether they're asking for money. And that we need to push back on this idea of what a street is. And how we design them and who they prioritize. So there's the practical enforcement questions. There's the idea that someone might look at this and say, okay, well, we've done something about pedestrian safety when the big things are still not tackled. And then there's this overall philosophical thing, like who gets to be in public? How do they get to move around? How do we design our public spaces? And this to us just doesn't address any of the things that we need to see addressed. So
Thank you.
Sorry, I keep adding on to questions. But Josh reminded me of something that I meant to say earlier, which is that as we talk about so many issues of being intertwined here, there's a lot in the conversation about safety downtown and violence downtown that is deeply intertwined with pedestrian safety and road infrastructure. Some of the immediate changes that we've seen downtown have been designated like loading zones for Uber and Lyft drivers. We have seen more enforcement of where food trucks are parking and how long they're able to park there. Those are road and pedestrian safety things. When we look at the complete streets policy updates that are coming soon that I'm so excited to see, one of the things they're considering is creating more like bistro and cafe outdoor seating downtown that would actually be off of the sidewalk. Not only does that then make a more accessible sidewalk, if you've ever tried to travel down a road with a mobility aid, down a sidewalk with a mobility aid when a chair has been pushed out into the sidewalk, that's not fun. But it also then addresses that #1 complaint we've had with safety downtown, which is people need a place to be. And right now, the only places to be are congesting the sidewalks so that no one can get past, or congesting the road so that no one can get past. Both of those create unsafe situations. Both of those lead to some of the physical violence that we have seen, where you're just in a group, congested, people are trying to get through, and violence can break out. And when we have those gathering areas like the cafe seating, like the bistro seating, that's not in a right-of-way passage area, then we can see some of that actually go in place to deter some of the violence, prevent some of the violence. So these issues really are intricately linked in a way that I think we don't often address or acknowledge.
Thank you, Vera.
Our time is coming to an end, but Alice Turner put together this excellent panel. I think she should have a chance to give the last question.
Okay, this is not really a question, it's a comment. When I first heard about this ordinance, my first concern was, as a weekly protester against the regime in Washington, was the 50 to 70 of us that stand on mediums for an hour every week come join us at Broadway and Stadium. We are on mediums. They might be larger than 6 feet. I'm not sure if all of them are. They're very difficult to cross even to the other sidewalks at those intersections. It takes me 10 minutes to get across Broadway. I'm also officially disabled. But the mediums are more visible. We have an important message to get out. I am hoping that we vastly grow to hundreds doing this every weekend. So we will be on every medium, wherever we're situated. We've already been told we can't park on private property in crossroads by the owner. So we now have to cross all those streets to get to private streets to park. It's very unfortunate. Please speak to the owners of those stores. But this is not to discount at all the impact on the homeless population, but also my civil liberties are at risk in this ordinance, and that's how I felt. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. I do think this is the beginning of an important discussion of all of these issues related to important issues in our community. I put in the chat, I talked to someone from Russia this week. They don't have unhoused people. They provide housing. Russia. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, well, what Alice said, and boy, what a great panel. All of you are welcome to come back with issues that you think that we, and many of you already have, with issues of importance to us. We sort of like to keep Vera here all the time to tell us everything about City Council, but I think she has plenty of places to go and plenty of things to do. It's wonderful seeing you again and watching you start your work for our great city. Thank you all. We're going to have our regular announcements and then an officers meeting, but other people are welcome to stay for the officers meeting. I don't think we're taking any controlled votes